CHAPTER 18 Part 1 of an Antarctic Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. An Antarctic Mystery by Jules Verne. Chapter 18 Part 1 A Revelation. The following day, the 29th of December, at 6 in the morning, the schooner set sail with a northeast wind, and this time her course was due south. The two succeeding days passed wholly without incident. Neither land nor any sign of land was observed. The men on the Halbrane took great hauls of fish, to their own satisfaction and ours. It was New Year's Day, 1840, 4 months and 17 days since I had left the Kerguelens, and 2 months and 5 days since the Halbrane had sailed from the Falklands. The half-breed, between whom and myself an odd kind of tacit understanding subsisted, approached the bench on which I was sitting. The captain was in his cabin, and West was not in sight, with a plain intention of conversing with me. The subject may easily be guessed. "Dirk Peters," said I, taking up the subject at once, "do you wish that we should talk of him?" "Him," he murmured. "You have remained faithful to his memory, Dirk Peters." "Forget him, sir? Never!" "He is always there before you?" "Always. So many dangers shared. That makes brothers. No, it makes a father and his son. Yes, and I have seen America again. But Pym, poor Pym, he is still beyond there." "Dirk Peters," I asked, "have you any idea of the route which you and Arthur Pym followed in the boat after your departure from Tsalal Island?" "None, sir. Poor Pym had no longer any instrument, you know, sea machines, for looking at the sun. We could not know, except that for 8 days the current pushed us towards the south, and the wind also. A fine breeze and a fair sea, and our shirts for a sail." "Yes, white linen shirts, which frightened your prisoner Nu Nu." "Perhaps so. I did not notice. But if Pym has said so, Pym must be believed." "And during those 8 days you were able to supply yourselves with food?" "Yes, sir, and the days after, we and the savage, you know, the 3 turtles that were in the boat. These animals contain a store of fresh water, and their flesh is sweet, even raw. Oh, raw flesh, sir!" He lowered his voice and threw a furtive glance around him. It would be impossible to describe the frightful expression of the half breed's face as he thus recalled the terrible scenes of the Grampus. And it was not the expression of a cannibal of Australia or the New Hebrides, but that of a man who is pervaded by an insurmountable horror of himself. "Was it not on the 1st of March, Dirk Peters," I asked, "that you perceived for the first time the veil of grey vapour shot with luminous and moving rays?" "I do not remember, sir, but if Pym says it was so, Pym must be believed." "Did he never speak to you of fiery rays which fell from the sky?" I did not use the term polar aurora, lest the half breed should not understand it. "Never, sir," said Dirk Peters after some reflection. "Did you not remark that the colour of the sea changed, grew white like milk, and that its surface became ruffled around your boat?" "It may have been so, sir. I did not observe. The boat went on, and my head went with it." "And then the fine powder, as fine as ashes, that fell?" "I don't remember it." "Was it snow?" "Snow? Yes. No. The weather was warm. What did Pym say? Pym must be believed." He lowered his voice and continued, "But Pym will tell you all that, sir. He knows. I do not know. He saw, and you will believe him." "Yes, Dirk Peters, I shall believe him." "We are to go in search of him, are we not?" "I hope so." "After we have found William Guy and the sailors of the Jane?" "Yes, after." "And even if we do not find them?" "Yes, even in that case. I think I shall induce our captain. I think he will not refuse." "No, he will not refuse to bring help to a man like him." "And yet," I said, "if William Guy and his people are living, we can admit that Arthur Pym—" "Living? Yes, living!" cried the half breed. "By the Great Spirit of my fathers, he is waiting for me, my poor Pym! How joyful he will be when he clasps his old Dirk in his arms, and I, when I feel him there," and the huge chest of the man heaved like a stormy sea. Then he went away, leaving me inexpressibly affected by the revelation of the tenderness for his unfortunate companion that lay deep in the heart of this semi savage. In the meantime I said but little to Captain Len Guy, whose whole heart and soul were set on the rescue of brother, of the possibility of our finding Arthur Gordon Pym. Time enough, if in the course of this strange enterprise of ours we succeeded in that object, to urge upon him one still more visionary. At length, on the 7th of January, according to Dirk Peters, who had fixed it only by the time that had expired, we arrived at the place where Nu Nu the savage breathed his last, lying in the bottom of the boat. On that day an observation gave 86° 33' for the latitude, the longitude remaining the same between the 42nd and the 43rd meridian. Here it was, according the half breed, that the two fugitives were parted after the collision between the boat and the floating mass of ice. But a question now arose, since the mass of ice carrying away Dirk Peters had drifted towards the north, was this because it was subjected to the action of a counter current? Yes, that must have been so, for our schooner had not felt the influence of the current which had guided her on leaving the Falklands for fully 4 days. And yet there is nothing surprising in that, for everything is variable in the austral seas. Happily the fresh breeze from the northeast continued to blow, and the Halbrane made progress towards higher water, 13 degrees in advance upon Weddell's ship, and 2 degrees upon the Jane. As for the land, islands, or continent, which Captain Len Guy was seeking on the surface of that vast ocean, it did not appear. I was well aware that he was gradually losing confidence in our enterprise. As for me, I was possessed by the desire to rescue Arthur Pym as well as the survivors of the Jane. And yet, how could he have survived? But then, the half breed's fixed idea! Supposing our captain were to give the order to go back, what would Dirk Peters do? Throw himself into the sea rather than return northwards? This it was which made me dread some act of violence on his part, when he heard the greater number of the sailors protesting against this insensate voyage, and talking of putting the ship about, especially towards Hearne, who was stealthily inciting his comrades of the Falklands to insubordination. It was absolutely necessary not to allow discipline to decline, or discouragement to grow among the crew, so that, on the 7th of January, Captain Len Guy, at my request, assembled the men and addressed them in the following words: "Sailors of the Halbrane, since our departure from Tsalal Island, the schooner has gained 2 degrees southwards, and I now inform you that, conformably with the engagement signed by Mr. Jeorling, $4,000, that is $2,000 for each degree, are due to you and will be paid at the end of the voyage." These words were greeted with some murmurs of satisfaction, but not with cheers, except those of Hurliguerly the boatswain and Endicott the cook, which found no echo. On the 13th of January a conversation took place between the boatswain and myself of a nature to justify my anxiety concerning the temper of our crew. The men were at breakfast, with the exception of Drap and Stern. The schooner was cutting the water under a stiff breeze. I was walking between the fore and main masts, watching the great flights of birds wheeling about the ship with deafening clangour, and the petrels occasionally perching on our yards. No effort was made to catch or shoot them. It would have been useless cruelty, since their oily and stringy flesh is not eatable. At this moment Hurliguerly approached me, looked attentively at the birds, and said, "I remark one thing, Mr. Jeorling." "What is it, boatswain?" "That these birds do not fly so directly south as they did up to the present. Some of them are setting north." "I have noticed the same fact." "And I add, Mr. Jeorling, that those who are below there will come back without delay." "And you conclude from this?" "I conclude that they feel the approach of winter." "Of winter?" "Undoubtedly." "No, no, boatswain, the temperature is so high that the birds can't want to get to less cold regions so prematurely." "Oh, prematurely, Mr. Jeorling?" Yes, boatswain. Do we not know that navigators have always been able to frequent the Antarctic waters until the month of March? Not at such a latitude. Besides, there are precocious winters as well as precocious summers. The fine season this year was full 2 months in advance, and it is to be feared the bad season may come sooner than usual. That is very likely, I replied. After all, it does not apply to us, since our campaign will be certainly over in 3 weeks. If some obstacle does not arrive beforehand, Mr. Jeorling. And what obstacle? For instance, a continent stretching to the south and barring our way. A continent, Hurliguerly? I should not at all be surprised. And in fact there would be nothing surprising in it. As for the lands seen by Dirk Peters, said the boatswain, were the men of the Jane might have landed on one or another of them, I don't believe in them. Why? Because William Guy, who can only have had a small craft at his disposal, could not have got so far into these seas. I do not feel quite so sure of that. Nevertheless, Mr. Jeorling, what would be so surprising in William Guy's being carried to land somewhere by the action of currents? He did not remain on board his boat for 8 months, I suppose. His companions and he may have been able to land on an island, or even on a continent, and that is a sufficient motive for us to pursue our search. No doubt, but all are not of your opinion, replied Hurliguerly, shaking his head. I know, said I, and that is what makes me most anxious. Is the ill feeling increasing? I fear so, Mr. Jeorling. The satisfaction of having gained several hundreds of dollars is already lessened, and the prospect of gaining a few more hundreds does not put a stop to disputes. And yet the prize is tempting. From Tsalal Island to the Pole, admitting that we might get there, is 6 degrees. Now 6 degrees at $2,000 each makes $12,000 for 30 men. That is $400 a head. A nice little sum to slip into one's pocket on the return of the Halbrane. But notwithstanding, that fellow Hearne works so wickedly upon his comrades that I believe they are ready to bout ship in spite of anybody. I can believe that of the recruits, boatswain, but the old crew? Hum! There are 3 or 4 of those who are beginning to reflect, and they are not easy in their minds about the prolongation of the voyage. I fancy Captain Len Guy and his lieutenant will know how to get themselves obeyed. We shall see, Mr. Jeorling. But may it not that our captain himself will get disheartened, that the sense of his responsibility will prevail, and that he will renounce his enterprise? Yes, this is what I feared, and there was no remedy on that side. As for my friend Endicott, Mr. Jeorling, I answer for him as for myself. We would go to the end of the world, if the world has an end. Did the captain want to go there? True. We two, Dirk Peters and yourself, are but a few to be a law to the others. And what do you think of the half-breed? I asked. Well, our men appear to accuse him chiefly of the prolongation of the voyage. You see, Mr. Jeorling, though you have a good deal to do with it, you pay, and pay well, while this crazy fellow Dirk Peters persists in asserting that his poor Pym is still living. His poor Pym, who was drowned, or frozen, or crushed, killed anyhow, one way or another, 11 years ago. So completely was this my own belief that I never discussed the subject with the half-breed. You see, Mr. Jeorling, resumed the boatswain, at the first some curiosity was felt about Dirk Peters. Then, after he saved Martin Holt, it was interest. Certainly he was no more talkative than before, and the bear came no oftener out of his den. But now we know what he is, and no one likes him the better for that. At all events, it was he who induced our captain, by talking of land to the south of Tsalal Island, to make this voyage, and it is owing to him that he has reached the 86th degree of latitude. That is quite true, boatswain. And so, Mr. Jeorling, I am always afraid that one of these days somebody will do Peters an ill turn. Dirk Peters would defend himself, and I should pity the man who laid a finger on him. Quite so. It would not be good for anybody to be in his hands, for they could bend iron. But then, all being against him, he would be forced into the hold. Well, well, we have not yet come to that, I hope, and I count on you, Hurliguerly, to prevent any against Dirk Peters. Reason with your men, make them understand that we have time to return to the Falklands before the end of the fine season. Their reproaches must not be allowed to provide the captain with an excuse for turning back before the object is attained. Count on me, Mr. Jeorling. I will serve you to the best of my ability." "You will not repent of doing so, Hurliguerly. Nothing is easier than to add a round zero to the $400 which each man is to have, if that man be something more than a sailor, even were his functions simply those of boatswain on board the Halbrane." CHAPTER 19.